as well that have been surrounding the mayor now for quite some time.
Let's go to Rob Masson, who is at federal court.
Yeah, John, a very dramatic moment up in the courtroom of Judge Eva Dossier about 15 minutes ago. For the first time in my memory, a sitting mayor of the city of New Orleans has been indicted by a grand jury. It was a 16-member grand jury. 12 of those grand jurors had to vote in favor of this indictment. We do not have the indictment in front of us at this point, but we do know that the indictment is of Mayor LaToya Cantrell and former New Orleans police officer Jeffrey Vappie, as you all have been discussing. Vappie, of course, already indicted last year. This grand jury has been meeting for quite some time. It was the same grand jury foreman involved in the Vappie indictment who brought the indictment forward to Judge Dossier just a short while ago. I'm joined by former U.S. Attorney, Assistant U.S. Attorney Matt Coleman, who was involved in the prosecution of Ray Nagin over a decade ago now, yeah. Right, Matt? I mean, this is something that can't be taken very lightly, to indict a sitting mayor of a major American city.
Absolutely. In this city's 200-year history, the first mayor to be indicted was Ray Nagin, and as you referenced earlier, he was out of the office. So this is the first time in our memory that a sitting mayor has ever been actually indicted under federal or state charges.
So from what we know about Jeffrey Vappie, there were a lot of payroll fraud allegations in the indictment against him. Can we read anything into the fact that he has been indicted with Mayor Cantrell?
I think you can. You'll find out just in a few minutes exactly what's in that indictment once it goes through the intake process. But based on last year's indictment of Officer Vappie that actually referenced the public official, you would expect to have some overlap, at least, in those charges here.
Matt, can you give us any background on what goes into the indictment of a sitting mayor of an American city? What higher-ups have to be consulted on such a decision?
Well, certainly the Department of Justice would be consulted. They have to be notified whenever there's a significant office holder that's going to be subject to an indictment. There doesn't have to be necessarily approval that's obtained unless there's some tax charges, but definitely DOJ main justice will be notified.
So many people have been indicted recently involved with City Hall. When you looked at the indictments of Randy Farrell and the campaign consultant and Fawad Zatan and Jeffrey Vappie, are you surprised at all that she would be linked with Vappie in the indictment?
Not based on what the charges were last year. As we saw, there was not just the traditional type of employer embezzlement that was alleged, but also reference to the mayor and being involved with the former police chief and potentially strong-arming her in regarding to the Vappie investigation.
And that was, we found out that Vappie had influenced the decision on whether or not to go with former police chief Michelle Woodfork, possibly by a meeting that they had together, correct?
Correct, and that stuck out in the indictment, and that was something that up until that point wasn't really out in the atmosphere, so to speak. So certainly we would expect to see some extraction from that original indictment to this new indictment.
I don't want to get into speculation. I know you don't either, but could it be a simple matter of depriving the citizens of New Orleans honest government services?
You would expect to see that. To what extent, to what dollar figure is going to be involved, that's left to be known just in a few minutes.
Would you think that the federal government is proceeding to this point without having some good cooperating witnesses?
You would expect to have that in every case, unless you're going to have a traditional wiretap interception, and you still have cooperating witnesses in that type of scenario. But here, in a historical case, looking back, you definitely have some cooperating witnesses.
And Matt, in the Nagin indictment, which you were intimately familiar with, there were a lot of surprises when that indictment came down. There were some peripheral characters who had been indicted before Nagin was indicted. The federal government had a lot more in that ultimate indictment that you prosecuted Nagin with than what we saw from some of the peripheral characters. Would you expect some surprises in this indictment?
We would expect some surprises. Obviously, the grand jury process is secret by rule and by nature, so we would expect to see some type of information and evidence to come out that you haven't heard of as of yet.
Jordan Ginsburg was the person who just handed up the indictment to Magistrate Judge Eva Dossier. Have you worked with him before? What do we know about him and how he operates?
I have. Jordan has been in the office for a number of years. He's done a number of public corruption cases, financial fraud cases. In fact, I believe he was the lead prosecutor against Walter Reed, the former district attorney of the St. Tammany Parish. So he's been around the block, so to speak, and he's intimately familiar with these public corruption cases.
And there were some. There has been an indictment of the former campaign consultant for Mayor Cantrell and some of the money that she was paying her as well. And the Walter Reed case involved some. There was some debate whether or not that was campaign fraud allegations or criminal allegations. Do you think we might see some other of those types of allegations brought forward against the mayor?
You definitely may see some of that. And of course, that was the defense in that case. Judge Fallon, the district court judge in that, ruled against those various motions to dismiss, and that was put to the jury and affirmed on appeal.
Summonses have been issued. What sort of timetable are we looking at?
2 to 3 weeks, potentially. That's a typical where you'll get a summons, defendant will come in for a first appearance, an arraignment, plead not guilty, get a trial date, and potentially a scheduling order and move on from there.
And what are your thoughts as to how long it might take to bring this to trial, if there is a trial?
Typically 12 to 18 months. Of course, that's just a typical assessment of what it takes for a federal corruption trial to go from soup to nuts, from the arraignment all the way to trial itself. But it also depends on the scope of the evidence, the scope of the discovery, how many documents are at play, how many witnesses are involved. So a lot of that just depends on what's actually going to be presented to an ultimate trial jury.
I believe former Governor Edwin Edwards was prosecuted in this building as a sitting governor. When you have a sitting elected official, does that change the way prosecutors proceed?
Not really. In fact, given the timing, by the time this trial goes to trial, if it does, Mayor Cantrell will be out of office most likely.
Now that she's been indicted, are there any additional steps being taken right now to preserve evidence that could be used at trial?
Sure, there's always that effort that goes into preserving all evidence, both in criminal and civil matters, but especially in a federal criminal corruption case.
So you think it'll take about a year before it goes to trial?
That's the typical, standard assessment time frame that goes from the arraignment all the way to trial. But again, it depends. If you're talking about 4.7 million documents like there was in the Nagin case, that takes time. If it's somewhat smaller in scope, it could go as little as 6 to 8 months. But potentially, I would estimate it somewhere in that 12 to 18 month range.
Matt, we've had a lot of shakeups in the U.S. Justice Department recently. There will be a new U.S. attorney coming in here in the next couple of months. Do you think that will anticipate do you think that will change this prosecution or affect the prosecution in any way?
I don't think so. I think it'll move forward just as planned, and at some point it's getting allotted as we speak to a district judge, and whoever that district judge is going to basically quarterback when this case goes to trial and how it goes to trial, and so we'll just have to see.
Very good. So that's the story. We're talking to Matt Coman, former assistant U.S. attorney here in the Eastern District of Louisiana, who prosecuted former Mayor Ray Nagin after he left office. This is the first time that we know of that a sitting mayor has actually been indicted. Matt says the prosecution could take about a year before it takes place. Mayor Cantrell indicted just a short while ago in magistrate court by a 16-member grand jury. The lead grand juror said that 12 members had to vote in favor of this indictment, and summonses have now been issued for former New Orleans police officer Jeffrey Vappy as well as Mayor LaToya Cantrell. And Matt was saying that she doesn't have to come in immediately. Neither one of them have to present themselves immediately.
Correct. They need to appear pursuant to that summons, which will be both the first appearance where they'll read the charges to the particular defendants, as well as likely enter a guilty plea, or a not guilty plea, which is the only thing that the magistrate can accept, and then go ahead and assess a bond. Potentially, in this case, it would be a recognizance bond, personal surety bond, some conditions of pretrial detention or pretrial release, I should say, and then at that point, there'll be a pretrial conference date set as well as a trial date set, and then you're in front of the district court judge from there.
How extreme would the circumstances have to be for prosecutors to seek the immediate arrest of somebody who's been indicted, which has not been asked for in this case?
Depends on the charges themselves, the substantive charges themselves, and based on what we believe the type of charges there would be, you would not have any type of request for detention from the government in this type of circumstance.
And no restrictions on travel or anything would be issued at this point, or would they?
That's up to the magistrate judge. And so you'll typically have travel restricted at a minimum to the United States, continental United States, and then travel outside the state with approval of probation and or the magistrate judge. That would be typical.
The jury foreman appeared to be the same man who brought the indictment against Jeffrey Vappy over a year ago. What do we know about the terms that these grand jurors are forced to set?
You really don't. You know what type of grand jury they are. I mean, you know that they'll allow to sit for 0 to 6 months plus extensions up to 18 months, sometimes depending on the type of grand jury, up to 24 months. And so besides that, that's all you get to know.
Are the jurors required to extend if prosecutors feel they need more time, or do they have any say in the matter?
No, the extension request goes to the district court that actually impaneled that grand jury, and that district court judge will make that decision.
Very good, Matt Coleman. Thanks so much. I appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely.
And that's a story from here at federal court, where we are waiting to get more information on the indictment that was just handed up to Magistrate Eva Dossier here on the 3rd floor of the federal courthouse. For the first time in history, a sitting mayor of the city of New Orleans has been indicted. Talking to Matt Coleman just a short while ago, who indicted and prosecuted Ray Nagin over a decade ago. Ray Nagin was out of office, and at this point a summons has been issued for Mayor Cantrell and her security officer, Jeffrey Vappy. And as you heard Matt say, they'll have a couple of days, if not weeks, to present themselves to the court for a formal reading of the charges. That's the story from federal court. Guys, back to you.